No one noticed her when she first sat down. That was the moment that mattered most. In a city where starships blocked out the sky and alien empires traded entire planets over casual conversations, a single young alien woman sat on the cold street with an empty hand. She was rich beyond measure, powerful beyond imagination, and for the first time in her life, completely invisible. What happened next would not just change her fate, but force the galaxy to confront a truth it had spent centuries avoiding. Lyra Varel had been born into one of the most influential alien dynasties in known space. Her people, the Aurelians, were admired for their intelligence, feared for their technology, and respected for their wealth. Entire civilizations depended on Aurelian trade routes. Wars had been stopped with a single word from her family. But Lyra was tired. Tired of bowing heads and false smiles. Tired of voices that sounded kind but calculated value behind every word. Tired of knowing that every gesture toward her was bought, not given. So she made a decision that shocked even herself. She would disappear. On the morning she left her tower residence, Lyra stood in front of a reflective panel and altered everything that marked her as important. Her luminous silver robes were replaced with a rough, colorless fabric. Her jewelry, symbols of power across 3 systems, were locked away. A faint layer of synthetic grime dulled the natural glow of her skin. Only her eyes remained unchanged, bright and deep, carrying intelligence no disguise could fully hide. Her personal AI hesitated as she prepared to leave. "You are removing all protection protocols," it warned gently. "I know," Lyra replied. "That's the point." She exited through service corridors no noble ever used and stepped into the lower levels of Nexus Vale, the largest interspecies trade city ever built. The smell hit first. Fuel. Food. Sweat. Metal. Then the noise. Languages overlapping. Engines humming. Lives moving fast with no space for weakness. Lyra walked until her feet ached. Then she Saturday. She held out her hand. The test had begun. Hours passed. Aliens of every shape and origin walked by. Tall crystalline traders. Insect-like diplomats wrapped in silk. Armored merchants surrounded by drones. Some glanced at her briefly. Most didn't look at all. A few reacted. One curled its lip in disgust. Another laughed. One flicked a scrap of packaging toward her feet as if feeding an animal. No one stopped. No one spoke kindly. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. She had expected indifference, but not the weight of it. It pressed down on her, heavy and silent, until the city felt colder than any vacuum. As the artificial sun began to lower, doubt crept in. Maybe this galaxy truly ran on power alone. Maybe kindness had become inefficient. She was about to stand up, about to end the experiment, when boots stopped in front of her. They were worn. Scuffed. Human-made. Lyra looked up. The being standing there was human. He was tall, broad in a way that spoke of physical work rather than genetic perfection. His clothes were simple. His posture alert but not aggressive. His eyes, warm brown, studied her face, not with judgment, but concern. He held out something small. Food. "Hey," he said quietly. "You haven't eaten, have you?" Lyra froze. No one had asked her anything all day. She hesitated, then slowly accepted the wrapped meal. Their fingers brushed. His skin was warm. Real. "Thank you," she said, her voice unsteady despite herself. He crouched so they were level. "Name's Eli," he said. "You safe here?" The question stunned her more than the food. "I don't know," Lyra answered honestly. Eli nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here. Clean. No questions. I can walk you there if you want." "Why?" she almost asked. Why help someone who offered nothing in return? But she followed him. As they walked, Lyra noticed how people reacted differently to Eli. Some nodded. Some stepped aside. No one challenged him. Humans were rare in Nexus Vale, known for their unpredictability and strange moral codes. "What brings you here?" she asked. Eli shrugged. "Contract work." Humans get hired where things are messy. That made her smile faintly. They turned into a quieter street. Shadows stretched longer here. Lyra sensed movement before it happened. 3 figures detached themselves from an alley. Predatory. Confident. Eli stepped slightly in front of her without thinking. "Problem?" he asked calmly. The aliens laughed. One moved closer. Then everything happened fast. Eli moved faster. Lyra watched in shock as the human redirected the first attacker with pure momentum, not strength. The second barely had time to react before finding himself on the ground. When the third grabbed for her, instinct took over. Lyra defended herself. Perfectly. Silence followed. Eli stared at her, surprised but not afraid. "You don't move like someone helpless," he said. Lyra met his eyes. "Neither do you." They didn't discuss it further. The shelter was modest but warm. Humans ran it. No one asked Lyra who she was or why she was there. As Eli prepared to leave, he paused. "Galaxies rough," he said. "But that doesn't mean we have to be." Then he was gone. Lyra sat on the provided cot long after, staring at her hands. One human. Out of thousands. And yet, somehow, he had changed everything. She didn't know it yet, but her test was already over. And the galaxy was about to fail it spectacularly. Lyra did not return to her tower that night. She lay awake on a thin cot inside the shelter, staring at a ceiling patched more times than she could count. The sounds around her were unfamiliar: soft breathing, distant footsteps, a quiet hum of systems struggling to keep the place warm. It was nothing like the silence of her private chambers high above the city. And yet, for the first time in years, the quiet did not feel empty. Her thoughts kept returning to the human. Eli. One small act. One simple choice. No cameras. No witnesses. No reward. If he had known who she truly was, would he have acted differently? That question burned. At dawn, Lyra slipped out before anyone noticed. She walked back into the city as the lower levels came alive. Vendors setting up. Workers rushing. Security drones gliding overhead, watching but never seeing. She changed nothing about her disguise. If anything, she made it worse. Over the next few days, Lyra lived 2 lives. By day, she returned briefly to her tower, resuming her role as an Aurelian noble. Meetings. Data streams. Advisors speaking of profits, influence, leverage. She listened with a new awareness, hearing the cold efficiency behind every polished sentence. By night, she returned to the streets. She begged again. She watched again. And the pattern repeated. Most aliens ignored her. Some mocked her. A few showed irritation that her existence disrupted their perfect view of the city. Kindness was rare, and when it appeared, it almost always came with conditions. A credit chip tossed her way by someone checking who was watching. Food given in exchange for gratitude loud enough to be noticed. Transactional compassion. Except for humans. She began to notice them once she started looking. A human mechanic quietly fixing a broken hovercart for an elderly alien without charge. A human courier stopping to guide a lost child of another species. A human medic treating an injured stranger in an alley long after their shift had ended. They were not saints. They argued. They struggled. They complained. But they helped. Lyra's confusion deepened. Humans were not the most advanced species. They were not the strongest. Their technology lagged behind many galactic powers. Their political influence was limited. And yet, they cared when it made no sense to care. On the 5th night, she saw Eli again. He stood outside the shelter, speaking with an older human woman who ran the place. He smiled when he noticed Lyra, genuine and unguarded. "You came back," he said. "I did," she replied. Something in her voice made him study her more closely, but he said nothing. They walked together, talking about small things. His homeworld. Her past, carefully edited but emotionally honest. She found herself laughing, actually laughing, at one of his stories. The sound startled her. No one had made her laugh without trying to impress her in years. As they passed through a narrow street, Lyra felt it again. Eyes on her. This time, she was certain. A tall reptilian alien leaned against a wall ahead, scales catching the light. He watched her too closely. When she and Eli passed, his gaze lingered. Eli noticed her tension. "You okay?" "Yes," she lied. But the sense of danger followed her back to the shelter. The next morning, Lyra used her real identity. She summoned information. Quietly, discreetly. The reptilian species she had seen were known smugglers. Opportunists. They thrived in the shadows between law and profit. Recently, several human trade routes had been attacked near the outer sectors. The incidents had been written off as random piracy. Lyra knew better. Patterns were forming. That night, the threat became real. She had just left the shelter when a hand grabbed her arm and yanked her into an alley. Pain flared. She twisted, striking where she knew it would hurt. The attacker staggered, but another stepped in. "You live interesting lives, noble girl," a voice hissed. Her blood ran cold. They knew. Before she could react, the sound of impact echoed through the alley. One attacker went down hard. The other turned, and froze. A human stood behind him, weapon raised, eyes steady. "You picked the wrong night," she said calmly. More humans appeared. Silent. Coordinated. The attackers fled. The woman lowered her weapon and looked at Lyra closely. "You're the one Eli mentioned." Lyra swallowed. "He told you about me." "He worried," the human replied. "That's Eli." They moved Lyra back to the shelter under guard. The truth pressed against her chest, demanding release. Every lie now felt heavier than before. When Eli returned from his shift the next day, Lyra asked him to sit with her. "I haven't been honest," she said. He waited. "I'm not who you think I am." He nodded slowly. "Figured." She told him everything. Her name. Her family. Her power. Her experiment. She expected anger. Betrayal. Distance. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "So all this time," he said, "you could have walked away whenever you wanted." "Yes." "But you didn't." "No." He looked at her, really looked this time. "Then I guess that's what matters." That was when Lyra understood. Humans did not measure worth by status or species. They measured it by choices. And somewhere out there, far beyond Nexus Veil, forces were moving, forces that had just made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And Lyra Varel intended to make sure the galaxy never did again. The truth changed everything, but not in the way Lyra expected. After she revealed who she really was, nothing about Eli changed. He still brought extra food to the shelter. Still joked with the volunteers. Still treated Lyra like a person, not a title. That steadiness unsettled her more than anger ever could have. 4 days, Nexus Veil moved on, unaware that a quiet line had been crossed. But in places far from the city lights, that line was being traced carefully. In the outer sectors, human patrol ships began reporting unusual activity. Trade lanes shifted. Signals vanished. Small skirmishes flared and disappeared before official channels could react. To the galaxy, it looked like noise. To those paying attention, it was preparation. Lyra was paying attention. She had returned fully to her role among the Aurelian elite, but she saw their world differently now. In council chambers filled with polished stone and controlled voices, she listened as leaders discussed acceptable losses and strategic patience. Entire colonies were reduced to numbers. Suffering became abstract. When she raised concerns about attacks near human-controlled routes, the response was dismissive. "Humans invite instability," one counselor said. "They lack discipline," another added. "A species driven by emotion is unreliable." Lyra felt something harden inside her. "They are driven by choice," she said evenly. "And that makes them dangerous to underestimate." The room fell silent. After the session, She accessed restricted intelligence feeds using authority she had never questioned before. What she found confirmed her fears. A coalition of fringe powers, pirates, criminal syndicates, and two minor but ruthless alien governments were coordinating strikes against human assets. The goal was simple: break the humans quietly, erase their influence before anyone noticed. They assumed no one would intervene. They were wrong. That night, Lyra returned to the shelter, not as a beggar, but not as a noble either. She came as herself. Eli noticed immediately. "You look like someone who's made a decision," he said. "I have," she replied. "And it's going to put you in danger." Eli leaned back, arms crossed. "Then it's probably something worth doing." She told him what she had discovered. About the coalition. About the planned escalation. About how humans were being targeted precisely because they were seen as weak. Eli listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. "What do you want to do?" Lyra took a breath. "I want to stop it. But I can't do it the Aurelian way. Not with threats and closed-door deals." "Then don't," Eli said. "Do it the human way." She frowned slightly. "And what is that?" He smiled, tired but sincere. "We show up. We protect each other. And we don't wait for permission." Within days, things began to change. Human networks, informal, decentralized, underestimated, activated. Not official fleets or grand announcements. Just messages. Warnings. Escorts offered where none were required. Civilian ships flying together instead of alone. Human engineers quietly reinforcing alien infrastructure without asking for credit. Lyra used her influence differently now. She leaked information to the right people. Redirected resources through shell channels. Shielded human operations from political interference without ever revealing why. The coalition noticed resistance, but misread it. They struck anyway. The first major attack came at the edge of the Krell Expanse, where a mixed convoy of alien and human ships was ambushed. The attackers expected panic, confusion, retreat. Instead, they found humans who had planned for failure. Civilian ships formed defensive patterns. Human pilots coordinated with alien captains in real time, adapting faster than any centralized command could. When one vessel was hit, others moved to shield it without hesitation. The attack failed. The second strike failed faster. By the third, rumors were spreading. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't rely solely on superior firepower or rigid doctrine. They adapted. They sacrificed. They protected non-humans as fiercely as their own. That terrified their enemies. On Nexus Vale, public opinion began to shift. Stories spread of humans refusing evacuation to help alien crews. Of human medics treating enemies once the fighting stopped. Of human engineers staying behind on damaged stations long after danger had passed. Lyra watched it happen from the center of power. This was what she had been looking for, not kindness as performance, but kindness as principle. The coalition made one last mistake. They went after Eli. They assumed he was insignificant. A single human. Easy leverage. They did not account for what humans did when one of their own was threatened. Eli was taken during a routine escort mission. The ambush was precise. Professional. Lyra received the alert within minutes. Something inside her went cold. She did not call a council meeting. She did not request authorization. She activated everything. Aurelian resources rerouted instantly. Human strike teams were given access codes no non-Aurelian had ever held. Alien captains who owed Lyra favors received coordinates with no explanation, and followed them anyway. The rescue operation was messy, chaotic, perfectly human. When it was over, the coalition's command hub was gone. Not destroyed, exposed. Every crime, every deal, every plan broadcast across open channels. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Eli survived. When Lyra reached him, he was bruised, exhausted, and smiling faintly. "Told you," he said hoarsely. You picked the right species. Lyra laughed, tears blurring her vision. No, she said softly. I picked the right people. In the aftermath, the galaxy scrambled to reassess. Humans were no longer dismissed. They were studied, cautiously respected, quietly feared. Not because they were the strongest, but because when faced with indifference, they chose to care, and when that choice was threatened, they stood together. Lyra Varel stood before the Aurelian Council days later and spoke plainly. We built a galaxy on power, she said. Humans built one on responsibility. And that is why the future will belong to them, whether we accept it or not. No one argued. Because by then, everyone knew. Humanity had already arrived. The galaxy did not change overnight. But it could no longer pretend. In the weeks after the rescue, Nexus Vale felt different. The same ships filled the sky. The same markets buzzed with life. Yet beneath it all, something invisible had shifted. Conversations paused when humans passed. Not out of fear, but consideration. Lyra felt it everywhere. In council chambers, where humans were no longer spoken about as temporary participants. In trade negotiations, where human representatives were suddenly invited instead of tolerated. In security briefings, where strategies now included a single quiet sentence, assume human adaptation. That sentence carried weight. The coalition that had targeted humans collapsed under exposure. Leaders fled. Allies denied involvement. Some systems rushed to distance themselves, issuing hollow condemnations. Others tried to justify their actions. None succeeded. Because the evidence was undeniable, and the story had already spread. Not as propaganda. Not as official broadcasts. But as shared experience. Alien captains told stories of humans staying behind on burning ships. Civilians spoke of human escorts who refused payment. Frontier stations remembered who answered distress calls when no one else did. Lyra watched the data feeds late one night, seeing how often one word appeared across languages and species. Trust. It was something no empire had ever manufactured successfully. Humans hadn't tried. That was the difference. Eli recovered slowly. Humans were resilient, but not invincible. Lyra visited him often, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing important at all. Those moments grounded her more than any throne or title ever had. One evening, as the artificial stars dimmed, Eli spoke softly. You ever regret it? He asked. Leaving all that power behind. Lyra considered the question. I didn't leave it behind, she said. I finally understood what it's for. She stood before the Aurelian Council for the last time not as an heir, but as a witness. She told them what she had seen as a beggar. What she had felt as someone ignored. What she had learned from a human who expected nothing. Some resisted. Some were uncomfortable. A few were angry. But none could deny the results. The Aurelian Charter was amended, something thought impossible. New protections were extended to non-citizens. Funding was redirected to mixed-species infrastructure. Human advisors were invited into systems once closed to outsiders. Not because Lyra demanded it, but because the galaxy had seen the alternative. When the session ended, an elder approached her quietly. You have changed us, he said. Lyra shook her head. No. Humans did. I just stopped looking away. She did not reclaim her old life. Instead, Lyra became something new, a bridge between worlds. She traveled with human crews. Walked alien streets without escorts. Sat with those who had no power and listened. Her story spread too. Not as legend. Not as myth. But as a reminder. That the richest being in the galaxy once sat on the ground with an empty hand, and learned who was willing to fill it. Years later, when historians tried to mark the moment everything shifted, they argued endlessly. Some pointed to battles. Others to treaties. A few to economic realignments. They were all wrong. The change began quietly. With a human stopping in a crowded city. With food offered instead of ignored. With a choice that made no sense in a universe ruled by calculation. And that was why it mattered. Because when the galaxy finally understood humanity, it wasn't their weapons it feared. It was their refusal to stop being human. And from that day forward, no one ever underestimated them again. Time passed, but the echo of that choice never faded. Human presence across the galaxy grew, not through conquest, but through connection. They became the species others called when systems failed, when negotiations collapsed, when trust was broken beyond repair. Humans arrived without promises of dominance. They arrived with tools, plans, and the stubborn belief that things could still be fixed. Lyra watched it all from the inside and the outside at once. She no longer lived in towers. She lived in motion. 1 month she was aboard a human exploration vessel helping negotiate first contact with a fractured alien society. The next, she was walking through ruined trade hubs, standing beside human engineers rebuilding power grids that would never belong to them. Again and again, aliens asked her the same question. Why do humans keep helping us? Lyra always gave the same answer. Because they remember what it feels like to be ignored. That memory was humanity's greatest weapon, and its greatest gift. Eli eventually returned to duty, though never quite the same. He refused promotions that would pull him away from the people on the ground. He preferred being where choices mattered in small, immediate ways. Lyra stayed close, not as an obligation, but as a partner. They never made grand declarations. They didn't need to. Their bond was built on something rarer than love in the galaxy, mutual respect without power imbalance. Years later, when a new interstellar alliance was proposed, humans were invited to lead it. They declined. Instead, they suggested a shared council where no single species held veto power, where responsibility rotated, where failure was addressed openly instead of hidden. Many alien leaders resisted, until Lyra spoke. You can rule without humans, she said calmly, but you cannot move forward without them. The alliance passed. History books would later name that era the human threshold, the moment the galaxy crossed from domination into cooperation. Children across dozens of species learned a simple story in school. Once, a rich alien girl pretended to be poor to test the galaxy. And the galaxy failed. But one human didn't. That human didn't know he was being tested. Didn't know history was watching. He simply stopped. That lesson endured longer than any empire. Because power fades. Technology ages. But a choice made when no one is watching? That shapes civilizations. And so, in a universe that once believed kindness was weakness, humanity rewrote the rules, not by force, but by refusing to abandon who they were. Not perfect. Not pure. Just human. And that was more than enough.